All right, guys, welcome to this series on creating a little mini blog with Bottle and Python. If you've never used Bottle before, we are going to be moving a little fast. So you might want to look at that at least a little bit. If you've never used Python before, you're certainly going to want to get at least a catch up on Python and the syntax there, because we're not going to be going over the basics of Python. We will be doing a little bit of HTML, not really any CSS though. We're going to use like just Bootstrap because we're more focused on the back end side of things, not really how it looks and everything, just enough to show us what we're doing and show us that we can do things. In fact, this whole series could be followed by using a tool such as Postman right here, but we're going to be doing the browser instead. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to be using PyCharm because I like it. It's a great IDE. If you're not used to an IDE or you prefer just a text editor like Visual Studio Codes, that's totally fine as well. They also have a built-in terminal, just like we're going to be using. Later on, you might be missing out on the built-in database viewer, but you can always get a third-party thing or just trust that you're doing the right thing as long as you're following along, and your database will be fine. And once we get it all set up, then you will be able to see kind of what is happening and what your database is storing. So let's go ahead and get started here. I'm going to create a new project. It's just going to be a pure Python project, and I'm just going to call it Bottle Blog because it's a blog in Bottle. It wants me to pick a Python interpreter, and we will go ahead and use the virtual environment. You totally don't have to here. I typically do mine in a different way anyways, but since we're just creating a brand new project here, we're going to do it like this. Now, you also could just use your built-in Python, but be aware if you're using that, then all of the scripts, when we run Python, you might have to run Python 3, whatever the command is, because of how you've got Python set up. So if you get some weird error when you try to run Python app.py, just try Python 3 app.py. But that being said, I'm going to go ahead and use a virtual environment here and get set up. All right, and now that we've got that here, we are going to go ahead and here's that virtual environment. We can just totally ignore that. But what we can do is go ahead and set up our basic application. This is just going to be the bare bones routes for our application. We're pretty much just going to be returning text right now from the Bottle app. Like I said, if you've never used Bottle before, you might want to go get a refresher on that at least, but I will try to explain these routes as we go through them a little bit. Okay, so let's go ahead and create the app.py, which is going to be basically our application. But before we can use Bottle, we've got to install it. Now you can go get a copy and store it as a text file in the same directory, or you can just pip install Bottle. And that'll go and fetch it from the, looks like it installed it pretty quick there. Wow. I'm going to do a pip list, make sure that we've got it. And yep, we've got it right here. You can see version 0.12.16. If you want to get the exact version, you can go ahead and do that, but probably any version forward of this will be fine. So now that we've got Bottle, we can import things from it. Most notably, we can import the run function. So let's go ahead and do that first. So from Bottle, import run. Run is all it takes to run your Bottle app here. Now, you can see it's asking me for a series of things, but most notably what we want is we want to tell it what host we're going to be on. And for us, we're just going to be on the local host. So you can literally just type in localhost. You don't have to know your IP, although it's most likely 127.0.0.1, but you can just go ahead and use localhost. Tell it what port you want to use. I'm going to use 8080. You can use whatever you'd like, as long as it's past, I think I'd say past 3000 and you're safe. So let's see. Debug. Now this one I'm going to set to true. What this does is it gives us more informative errors when we're running our app. If we turn this off, then we wouldn't get as informative errors. And you might want to turn that off in production, because once you're in production, you don't want your end user seeing super informative errors about how the back end of your app looks. But for us, we want to see those. And one last option that I like to use is reloader. And what that'll do is when we save the application, it'll automatically restart the server, the local server that we're going to be running, so that we don't have to every time. And that's it. That's all it takes to go ahead and run a Bottle app. So I'm going to go ahead and just type Python app.py. And now if you aren't using a virtual environment, or if you have Python 2 and 3 set up on your computer, you might want to go ahead and use Python 3 app.py because we do want to use Python 3 here. But for me, since I'm using a virtual environment with Python 3.7 as my interpreter, I can just use Python and it will get the right interpreter. Once I go ahead and run this, you can see here it tells us that it's listening on localhost port 8080. Now once I click on that, you can see here we just get this 404 error, not found. Well, that is because we haven't defined any routes. A route is what tells the computer, or tells your server, what you want to get from the application. So if you send the route such as we did with this blank route, which is the default route here, just that blank slash of nothingness, well then it tries to go and get that, but we haven't defined it here, so it's not going to be there. If you were to say /blog, it would know to get the blog because you've defined that in your application. Now we're going to go ahead and define our first route. So in order to do that, we have to import route from bottle. Route is just a decorator we can use like this, route, and define what the route looks like, and then define a function attached to that route. We're just going to call this index. And that index isn't going to take anything in as arguments, but all it's going to do is return hello world. And once we have that, you can see once I save this application and give it a second perhaps, and it looks like that reloader isn't kicking in. It doesn't always. I'm not sure what the criteria is for it making a change or for it not making a change, but if we come here and try to reload, it'll tell us site can't be reached, but if we reload a second time, it'll update itself. So you can see here it went ahead and shut down and then it opened it back up. So now that it's opened back up, now that we went to this blank route, boom, we got hello world. Now that we've got that blank route there set up and it's returning that string, we're going to go ahead and define some other routes. But before we do that, we want to talk about get and post routes, because not every route is just a plain route. There's several different protocols for reaching out to a route on a server. Most notably is post and get. The difference between them is mostly semantic, although with post and get, the major difference is that a post request can send parameters in a secure way, whereas get sends get parameters up in the URL bar or up in the server request route, and we don't want that if we're trying to do something secure. When typically you can think about it like this. If you want to get information, you send a get request to the server. If you want to post information to, say, the database, then you would send a post request to the server. Knowing that, since this route right here, all we're doing is returning something, we're not changing anything in a database, we're not changing anything in memory, we're just getting the string hello world, we can change this to a get route. And now in order to do that, we need to import get from bottle. Now that we've talked about get and post, we're not going to be using route at all. We're going to be making sure we use the proper route here. All this is a route that only accepts get requests. It will not accept the post request, as you can see here. If I load up Postman here, which is just an application that lets me send post requests, or it lets me send post, get, delete, put, all these different protocols, right? So localhost, and I'm going to go to localhost, and if we send a post request here, once it's done loading, it's trying to get that request. I'm going to shut down the server and restart it, see if that fixes things up. If we go ahead and send that, there we go. We can see that we got a 405 method not allowed. That is because we allow get requests on this blank slash route, but we do not allow post requests. So therefore, if we send a get request right here, we send that, we get hello world, because we do allow that and we do define the action for that. Now that being said, let's go ahead and define some other routes. Now, so the homepage for the blog, I don't think should be the homepage for our site, because perhaps on your site you have a portfolio, you have a blog, you have yada yada, whatever. But I think the blog, we're going to give it its own homepage, and that's going to be the route of just /blog. Easy enough. So we're going to define a get route here. That's just going to be /blog. And we're going to define here the post list function, because really that's all the homepage of the blog is just a list of all the posts, right? So just here we can just return all posts. And there we go. Now, if we go ahead and we send on the blank route, we get hello world, but if we send on the blog route, we get all posts. Now, Postman is just an application that sends requests. We can do it just as well from the browser right here, all posts. There we go, same thing. This can be used to test like APIs that are more generic than just for web, it could be for anything. We're not going to be getting into that here, we're just going to be doing web, so I'm going to stick to the browser from here on out. Okay, so after the blog, well, perhaps after seeing a list of posts, you want to view an individual post. If you want to view an individual post, you might request that in any number of ways, but we're going to do it here as a URL parameter. Now, the way to do URL parameters, it just goes in the URL as a normal, it looks like it's part of the route, right? So, and you define it like this. It'll be /blog/post ID, right? And so what that's going to do is give us the post ID as an argument to our function we're about to define. So define post detail, because we already defined a list of posts. Now we want a detailed post, what's the specifics on this particular post. And you'll see here we can accept this post ID because Bottle is going to grab whatever we pass in here. It might be something like /blog/17, right? And that means we're requesting post number 17. Bottle is going to grab that 17 or 14 or 209 or 209, whatever it may be. It's going to grab it and it's going to pass it into here as a post ID. So in here what we can do is we can say return, and I'm going to do a formatted string here in Python, and we're going to just say this is the details for post ID, right? So we grabbed that and we passed it in and we used it. Now let's go ahead and check that out in the browser and see what we get. So we already went to the blog route and we can see that's, well, the server's got to restart itself. There we go, that's still working. But now if we pass 17, this is the details for 17. So you can see what we did is we defined right here /blog/some post ID, and then here when we go to that, no matter what our post ID is, it is rendered here for us in that text. So if we say 209, boom, there we go, 209. Now you'll notice something here though. If I end with a slash and I send that, we're going to get an error 404 not found. Now, why is that? Well, that is because Bottle says that this route is different from that route. That route is different from that route. The ending slash makes a difference to Bottle. Now, that is technically correct, but not how most people perceive that. Most people expect that if I go to here, or if I go to here with an ending trailing slash, it should still take me to the same place. Therefore, on Bottle's documentation website, they recommend this fix here if you want to do that. And this is going to involve what is called a hook. A hook allows us to hook into the request process and says before any request is processed, do this first. So if you send us a request on this route, do this first, what we're about to define here. And I'm just going to copy paste this over from their website, and there we go. Now also here we need the request parameter from Bottle, so I'm going to import that as well. And once we have that, this is going to work. Don't worry too much about what this is doing or how it works really. What it's doing is it's stripping this trailing slash off of the end of any request that you get. So now you'll see that if we go to here, once we let it reload, it goes ahead and gives us details for 209. And if we get rid of that trailing slash, details for 209. That's just a little thing that you've got to do if you want your routes to be kind of uniform there. So now that we've got all that, we can go ahead and keep defining routes without worrying about whether or not it's going to be different for this or this. So moving on, we are going to now, what if we want to create a new post? Well, creating a new post or updating a post, either one, is kind of a unique situation. If you want to create the post, well, you're posting information to the server, but if you just want to get the form, then you don't want to send a post request. So how do we do this? Well, we define two different functions based on whether or not the route is a GET request or a POST request. So the route is going to look identical, but it's going to be different based on whether it's a GET request or POST request. So let's go ahead and do that. If we say @GET to define a GET route, and we say it's going to be blog/post form, and you might think we might name this, post creation or something like that. Don't do that. You're going to see why here in a little bit. But for now, just do it like this. And we're going to define a post form function, right? And here we are just going to say return form to create new post. So what happens if I go ahead and send a request there? So post form, if I can type, cannot type, and let that reload. There we go. So form to create a new post. So that's what it's going to be giving us in the future once we create the index and the HTML pages for these. Now that's a GET request. The browser by default sends a GET request when you send something in the URL. We'll go back to Postman here, and if I send post form, we are going to get, going to cancel that. I don't know what's going on. If I kill the server and reload it there, now send this, there we go, form to create a new post. However, if I send a post request, nothing. 405 method not allowed. So let's go ahead and fix that, shall we? So here we want to create a post request. Same route, blog/post form. And we're going to define a new function, post form submit, because now we're submitting the form, and we're going to return submitted form, right? And you'll notice here we need to import this as well. So we imported GET, we also need to import post. Now once we do that, then we can have it. This is a bottle defined decorator, so we need to import it from bottle. Okay, now once we've done that, we can now send a post request as well to the server and submitted form, right? Now, technically, when you send a post request, you don't typically get a response like that back. Typically what you get back is a redirect to a different page or something based on what happened on the server side. So here on the server, we might say, if post successfully created, then we would redirect to somewhere. Or if it wasn't, then we'd redirect somewhere else. We're not going to build that logic in quite yet, but what we will do, so what I'm going to go ahead and do here is we're just going to print created new post, just to simulate the server doing something. And then instead of returning a string, returning a response, we're going to redirect. In order to redirect, we need to, of course, import that from bottle. And once we do that, we can go ahead and return. I don't think the return is necessary, but I'm just going to keep it there for consistency. We're going to return a redirect here. And your post ID is going to be created when you create the post. For now, we're just going to simulate that. I'm going to say post ID equals 1. And then I'm going to use a formatted string here, /blog/post ID. Now what that does is takes that post ID, puts it in the route, so it's going to look something like /blog/1. And remember, that is going to be caught by this route defined right here, and it's going to say details for 1. So let's go ahead and test that out. So if we go ahead and we come here and we send a GET request, remember, it's going to be form to create a new post. However, if we go and send a post request here in Postman, and we let that load, let's go ahead and cancel. Let's go ahead and reset the server. Not sure why it needs to do this for Postman, but whatever. If we go ahead and send that as a post request, we're going to get sent back to this right here. So we've got the details for 1. It redirected us back to the page that shows us the details for a particular post. That's what we wanted. So there we go. Now we've defined how to get the form to create a post and how to do something with it when someone sends a post request to the server in order to create that new post. And now if you remember me saying the browser automatically sends a GET request and you're wondering how are we going to send a post request then? Well, don't worry, we're going to get there. That involves using an HTML form, and it's pretty easy, and it's actually the only native HTML way to do it, and that's how we're going to do it later on. But for now, we're just defining our basic posts. Okay, moving on from there, there's typically when you're thinking about these types of things, there's 4 major operations you want to be able to do. That is create, read, update, and destroy, or delete, or whatever. So that means you want to be able to create something, you want to be able to read it back from the server, and you want to be able to update it if you want to make changes, and then finally you want to be able to delete it if you don't want it anymore. So we have so far defined how to create something right here. We've defined how to read it back right here. This is reading it back individually, and right here this is reading it back as a group of all posts, which of course right now we're not actually doing. We're just simulating and we're just putting in some placeholder text right now, but we will be doing. We're just defining our routes, but we've defined the create and the read. Well, what about update? Well, to update something, you might think, okay, we're going to create a new, post update route or whatever, but we don't actually need to do that. And this is one of the great parts about a server framework like Bottle right here. What we can do is we can just define something, and here for post form we can define another get route. So if now we can say blog / other post form, and this now says if the user goes to post form or other post form, we want to send them here, form to create a new post. And I'll show you that real quick. If we just plug in other right here, other post form, it should send us to the same thing, form to create a new post. So that's pretty neat, but we want it to be different, right? If we're updating, we want the form to be pre-filled with values of what the title is, what the body is, all that kind of stuff. And if we are creating a new post, we want the form to be empty because there shouldn't be any information there yet. So how do we determine that? Well, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to define it as the same route but with an additional parameter here. And that parameter, just like before, is going to be post ID. So now what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, if the user goes to blog / post form, I want them to get sent to the form to create a new post, right, for right now, and we reload for the server's sake, then there we go, form to create a new post. But if I go to 17, then I want it to do the same thing. Now here we go, we've got post form, got unexpected keyword argument, post ID. Well, that's because Bottle tried to pass this post ID that we passed in right here in the URL, it tried to pass it on to the post form, but it couldn't accept it. So we're going to go ahead and accept it now, post ID, there we go. Now let's go ahead and reload this and reload again, and there we go, form to create new post. However, now if we come here, now it's saying, okay, post form is missing a required argument, post ID. Well, how do we fix this? We want to be able to use the same function for 2 different routes depending on whether or not there's a post or not. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to say post equals none. And in Python syntax, post ID equals none. What this says is, okay, the post ID is going to be none unless someone passes in something else. So if you pass me 17, post ID is 17. If you pass me 24, post ID is 24. But if you don't pass me anything, well, the post ID is going to be the value none, which is like undefined or something in other languages, right? So now we can test for that post ID. So we can say if post ID, then we are going to say, then we're going to return some different text here. We're going to say, and we're going to make it some formatted text so we can tell what we're doing. We're going to say, this is going to be the form to update post ID, right? Else, we are going to return form to create a new post. So now what we've done is we've said, okay, there's these 2 routes. Both of them go to the same function because they're kind of doing the same exact thing. A lot of the functionality is going to be the same, so I don't want to rewrite it in a new function. So I'm just going to determine whether or not there's a post ID with this post form route. And now if we go ahead and test this, if we send it to post form with a blank, we reload for the server's sake, we get here form to create a new post. However, if we add 17 onto here as post ID 17, we get form to update post 17. Again, same function, 2 different routes. The functionality is determined dynamically inside the function. It's a pretty awesome thing you can do. It's going to become pretty handy, especially once we start rendering a template that's going to be the same for post creation and post updating. Now for the post function, it is identical to what we just did. You're just going to pretty much, we're going to copy paste this. It's bad to do, but I'm going to do it. Copy paste, and I'm going to change this get here to a post. And I'm going to pass in post ID equals none as well. So by default it's none, but if it gets past something by bottle because we gave it a number or a post ID in the URL, it's going to get passed in by bottle, and it'll be that as the parameter. Now we're going to do the exact same thing we just did here. Up above, we're going to say if post ID. Then what we're going to do is we're going to say, we're just going to print out that we are updated existing post number post ID, right? Else we are going to say just create a new post, right? We're just simulating this stuff. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say post ID equals new post ID, or like we did before, we can just say that new one is going to be 1, right? So there we go. Actually, I think it's better if we just say new post ID because it's just a placeholder. We want to know that it's a placeholder, not an actual number. So there we go. So after that, we can still here pass in the post ID, because if we got the post ID in the parameter, we are going to use the one we got right here. If we didn't, well then we create a new post, and when we create a new post, we're obviously going to be able to get a new post ID. Right now that logic isn't there, but we're going to put it in later. So for now we just have this placeholder, so it's going to redirect us, and you'll see that here in a second. So if I go ahead and I send a post request to the blank post form, and I'm just going to preemptively here restart that server because Postman always throws a fit. There we go. Details for new post ID. So it says, and if we come over here, we see create a new post. So it's saying, okay, we created a new post and we sent you to the detail page for that new post. Now, if we go to post form /17, now it redirects us to details for 17. And if we come here, we can see it says updated existing post number 17. So it says, okay, we updated the post that you told us to, and we're redirecting you to the details page for that post. So there we go. There's update. We didn't have to define a new function, nothing like that. All we did was use an existing function and dynamically change some behavior there, which is going to come in super handy later. Now the last thing we're going to do is define that last functionality you would typically define for something like that, which is delete or destroy. Now for that, if what you might want to do is something like delete, but actually you can't do that here because we're targeting a web form, and we're not going to be doing any JavaScript to send a delete request, and all HTML can send is either a get request or a post request. So this is actually going to be a post request. It's going to be deleting something, but it's going to be a post request, which is still fine because we are doing something to the database, so post is better than get. So we're going to use post. But that's going to be on the route blog / I think post delete should be fine, and then here we don't need to define two different routes, is there a post ID or not, because if you're deleting something, you have to tell it which one to delete. So we're just going to pass in post ID as that URL parameter there. Then we're going to define a function, we're going to call it post delete, and we're going to accept that post ID. And again, we don't need to define a default value here because we're always going to get a post ID when we're deleting something. So here we're just going to simulate that server behavior by saying deleted post using post ID, and then we'll just return a redirect. Again, once you do a post, you're not going to really send a response. You're going to redirect to somewhere else and let them handle the response. So we're going to redirect here probably just to the home page, right? We can't redirect them to a details page of a post we just deleted. So we're just going to redirect them to the generic blog homepage, right? So they can see all the rest of the beautiful posts we have. So once we've done that and the server is restarted, if I come here and I send a post request to, we called it post delete, and say, sure, 17, I send that, and we get sent back here to the all posts, which if you remember is the blog route for the post list. So there you go, there we have it. We have defined how to create, how to read, how to update, how to destroy. That is the 4 major operations you want to do with a blog. We've defined all those routes rapid fire, and we haven't done any logic on how those are going to work yet, but that's fine. We've defined our routes. I find this is helpful, especially when you're starting out and it's really early. You just want to get those routes up there and start thinking about how your app is going to look, what it's going to do, what routes need to be there. Put it all in there. Just put in some placeholder text for now. Just return some plain strings, not even any HTML, no templates, no nothing. Just so you can see what's happening when you send routes at your browser or at your server. Now, you can use your browser to send GET requests and test out your GET routes, right? But you can't do that to test your post routes out. So in order to test out your post routes, make sure those are doing what you think they should be doing, you can go ahead and use something like Postman, or I think Axios is another one. Something. There's another one out there. There's some good tools out there that allow you to send post and GET requests and all sorts of other fun ones too. Once you get more into this stuff and you know what you're doing, that you can test out a backend that you're building, like we are here. We're building a backend for a blog application on the web. And so we've defined all our routes there, and that's all I had for you in this lesson. So congrats, you've defined all those routes. In the next lesson, we are going to go ahead and start looking at how to render some basic HTML pages. So that should be fun, should be a lot shorter, and I'll see you there.